Learning the art of painting is not an easy task. It takes a great deal of intelligence, keen analysis, study, and practice. Artist Edgar Allan Payne. This is The Artful Painter, our lessons and inspiring conversations for artists, collectors, and people who love art. Frank Serrano's paintings have a sense of atmospheric depth that seem to extend far beyond the two-dimensional surface of a canvas. As you look at one of his Western landscape paintings, it's as if you can feel the summer heat enveloping California's Owens Valley. You feel a breeze gently tugging at your soul as you gaze in awe upon the purple glow of the fading light of the setting sun cast upon the immense eastern Sierras. This is Edgar Payne country. Inspired by Payne as well as artists Sam Hyde Harris, Tenney Johnson, Maynard Dixon, and others, Frank's paintings reflect his own developed style filled with incredible passion that beautifully capture the dramatic atmosphere and stunning light that infuses the vast landscape of the West. Frank says that painting on location enriches his life. His paintings do not exist as mere pictures. They are like a cinematic film that stirs your heart with a deep emotional response to the story that unfolds before you of the epic Western landscape and the people who inhabit its vast spaces. Years of outdoor painting has honed Frank's sensitivity to the landscape. Frank Serrano's keen sense of observation and heartfelt emotional response to the Western landscape enable him to paint not only the scene before him, but also the air between things. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. You having good weather out there in California?
Yeah, it's beautiful right now. I'm just sitting here looking out at the pasture. Some pelicans just flew by.
Tell me about where you live.
In the Owens Valley, which is about 4.5 hours north of Los Angeles.
Oh, wow. So you're in Edgar Payne country.
I'm in Edgar Payne country. I'm actually right in the town of Big Pine, which is the way to the Big Pine Lakes, where he actually used to, spend quite a bit of time and paint.
I've been to California, but not that part. So I would like to see the Sierras.
Yeah, it's funny because there's quite a few people that they don't know this Owens Valley even exists. They're like, "Where do you live?" And I said, "I live in the Owens Valley." They're like, "Where's that?" And I said, "Well, right at the base of the Eastern Sierra." And then they kind of try to figure it out, maybe look at maps or online.
Frank, I'm really happy to have you on The Artful Painter. I've been meaning to have you on for quite some time. So I finally get to talk to you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be on it and share with the folks out there about my process and where I'm at.
If I only had one word that I was allowed to describe your paintings, the first word that comes to my mind is atmospheric. There's just this quality of air and light in your paintings that I find very appealing. How would you describe your painting style?
That word is perfect because when I started painting early on, I didn't go to an official art school or anything like that. So my education was museums and things like that. And so I saw some painters that really, their work really struck a chord with me. One was Sam Hyde Harris. He was an early California impressionist painter back from, Edgar Payne time, actually. His work was very atmospheric. And so that kind of reminded me of when I was younger and would go on trips with my family. I would take my sketchbook with me, and I'd always want to make something look far and near. So I was always playing with my values in my drawings to get that depth. And so that was creating that air between things. That was really exciting to me. So I would say that my work is atmospheric. I love painting light as well. And that's all part of it. So
you really can't have one without the other, can you?
No, not really. Not really. Yeah. So, those are the comments that I would get from, like, say, later on as my career started. A collector would say, "Oh, I love the atmosphere," or I love the light, or I can feel how hot it is or whatever. And that really always that was a good feeling because that's what I was trying to convey.
Well, you got an early start thinking about that. Was that just a intuitive thing, or did you do some reading or self-education to help you figure that out?
I think it was totally intuitive. I mean, as a kid, I drew, and I had, when people say, "Oh, you're born with it" and stuff, I truly believe that I had a lucky gift. And so as I was growing up, I always drew. I mean, whenever I'd go to my grandmother's house, she wouldn't let us go outside that much because she didn't live in the greatest area. So we were always inside in her house watching TV or something while she babysat us. And this is when I was real young. I was always drawing. I was sitting at her table drawing. So I was drawing something, but for some reason, I wasn't just drawing that object. I was drawing where it was, its surroundings. And I had to do that value sketch in order to create that. It wasn't just, okay, I'm going to paint a toaster and then I'm going to paint the plug. I had to make the plug look further away than the toaster. So that was my thing. Yeah.
So a combination of atmosphere and perspective.
Exactly.
So you were drawing, I assume you're talking about with pencil or pen. At what point did you decide I want to work with oils?
Oh, this was much later because as a kid, I went through the whole art school. In school, we had art, which was fortunate because nowadays that's one of those things that they don't really always have in school. They kind of cut those programs. But I was lucky that I was in those decades where we still had art school. We had good art teachers. And I'm not saying art school, but art in elementary school, art in junior high, art in high school.
Right. It was an elective. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I was always in those classes. I was always doing these little contests that they would have. I even did contests outside of school, like in our city, they would have an art contest in the newspaper or something like that. So I was always doing things like that, just continuing. And I knew I wanted to do my career was going to, have art as its basis, but I didn't know what I was going to do yet. My dad, when I was young, my dad said, "Oh, you're good at drawing cartoons and stuff, and you should maybe work for Disney or one of these studios." And, I thought of that, but it wasn't, I was still pretty young at the time. So I didn't really put too much thought into it. But later on I did, but at the same time, I was into not wanting to really work for somebody. I wanted to have my own business. So I ended up studying business and stuff like that in school, and then ended up having, doing that instead for a while. And that was art related too, because I started a screen printing company.
Well, I think that's interesting that you had an interest in learning about the business side of things. A lot of people just don't even want to think about business and marketing. It's just, but you got to do it no matter what you do. I don't care what endeavor you do. If you're going to make money at it, you're going to have to do something with business and marketing to make it work.
Yeah. I mean, I lucked out again in school. Is actually junior high. We had this thing called Junior Achievement, and it was a program. I think it was a nationwide program, and it was an after school. It was normally at a school. It didn't have to be the school you were going to, but it could have been at another school where professionals came in and taught you how to run a business. And this was in junior high, so I was in like 8th or 9th grade. And so I took that, and that's what really excited me about being in business. And my dad had encouraged me in my art, and then it also, both my mom and dad encouraged me to do this program. So, I went through that, and I think that's kind of what sparked me to go in that direction. And that's what I ended up doing. I'm glad I did, because it actually did help later on as I became a full-time painter. But I mean, the two don't go together. Trying to be creative, and then you have to switch gears and run your business. It's sometimes that can be a little daunting.
Well, it's not easy, that's for sure. I mean, it never has been easy, and so. But let's get back to painting, though. Your paintings that you do today are they're beautiful. They depict the Western landscape. I just saw you post on Facebook. You're doing a nice It looks like a cowboy scene, horse and a cowboy.
Yeah, Cowboy Nocturne.
Yeah. So tell me the story of that painting.
Well, moving up here to the Owens Valley, I was very fortunate to find a home that was right on the edge of a ranch. So my backyard is the ranch. There's a ranch fence, and then there's usually some cattle that graze out in the grass field out there. And I have pretty much an unobstructed view all the way to the Inyo Mountains. So, I mean, I do have a house on each side of me, but my backyard faces the ranch. So it's gorgeous. And as I started to meet my neighbors, I met the local ranchers, and they really were super, super nice and very generous in letting me know that I can always come by and see what they're doing. And if I wanted to take pictures, I could do that, because I had mentioned to them that I was an artist and a Western landscape painter. And so that was really, really exciting to hear that, because even as a kid, as I mentioned before, drawing when I was a kid, one of the things I used to draw a lot was horses. And so I grew up drawing horses, portraits of horses, or horses out in a field, or I didn't do necessarily the cowboy on a horse. It was mostly horses. So I had that ability to draw the anatomy, and, in my training as I grew up, I was pretty much able to draw the figure and stuff like that. So basically it was just going out there, hanging out with those guys, and getting a lot of reference material so that I could start painting cowboys, because I was always excited about that. Whenever I drove somewhere, like say I was in the Southwest, and me and another painter were driving by a ranch, and we saw some guys moving cattle, I always wanted to stop and take photos, because I always thought, I'm going to paint this. So it was kind of in the back of my mind earlier on, but I just didn't live in those areas. So for me, it wasn't an authentic thing.
That must be an amazing experience, being able to have that view from your backyard to do that. That's awesome that you have that. But I noticed with this painting that you're doing, I really appreciate how open you are on social media. You're showing your process, walking us through it. And and this one, you started with a drawing, from what I understand. But you just drew it straight from your reference materials onto the surface. I
mean, because that's how I started off drawing. I mean, I did, when I was young, I did look at art books and things like that, and how to do this, how to draw. Walter Foster books when you were a kid, those were always fun to have, because it would say, learn, here's a book on horses, learn how to draw horses, or here's a book on, drawing trees, so I had some of those books when I was a kid. So I learned some proper techniques in doing, in drawing. So but as I grew as an artist and my techniques improved, I still had that ability to just draw straight from what I was looking at and go straight to the page without any tools. Like I don't grid, I don't project. Although the projection is something that I think about, because when you're getting ready for a show and you have to do like 20 paintings, you don't always have that luxury of just going at a slow speed or a comfortable speed. Sometimes you have to go kind of quick because the show's coming up and things like that. So you might have to use those tools to get the work done quicker. So I actually was fortunate enough to go to an artist named Z.S. Lang. I went to his home and studio, and he's a great Western painter. He's in most of the big shows. And he will do a full drawing of whatever he's going to paint on, say, like a 12 by 16 sheet of drawing paper. He'll do multiple figures and everything. Then he'll project his drawing onto the canvas. So he's not actually projecting the photograph or anything like that, because he recomposes things. He uses lots of references to make the drawing, and then he goes and projects that. So that's something I was thinking about. If I ever did multiple figures and was using multiple references, I would probably do it that way.
That's interesting. I did not realize he was doing that. Is he using a LED projector to project the image? I
didn't see his projection, but I'm sure it's, they have all different types of projectors. I mean, Artograph makes different projectors, and they have some that are like maybe the surface area that you put your photograph in is probably like 6x6 or 8x8. So that's pretty small, but they have bigger ones. Or now you could probably digitally do it and use a digital projector or something like that. But I didn't actually look at his projector and see what he has. But that's the only way he could get that image from a 12x16 up to like a 40x50 or whatever he was doing.
Without going through a laborious grid system.
Yeah. And I'm sure he did that too, but it was, I always thought it was pretty cool. And I've heard of other artists projecting, and most of the time, it's the artists have that ability. They're good. They can draw. So it's not, it's not a big deal. It's just to speed things up.
I have heard traditionalists kind of poo the whole idea of projection, considering a form of cheating. I'm not in that school though. I think it's a fine tool when used properly. Yeah.
I mean, I used it when I was in my other job, in order to, cause sometimes you have to be extremely accurate. Like if you're, say, redoing somebody's logo or something like that, it has to be extremely accurate. So that's what you would use it for. But for me with painting, I get a sense of more realism and not such a stiff look to my work if I hand draw it. I think when you project it or you're projecting a photograph, you tend to paint it a little bit more. You kind of paint between the lines, you know what I mean? And it just looks too stiff. That's why I prefer to freehand it.
So when you're doing a painting like this one that you've been showing on social media, what's the design process? How do you come up with that particular design, that particular subject matter, and put it to canvas?
That's a great question because, when I teach my workshops, and I mostly teach them plein air, the students watching me do a demo, and I'm doing what's right out in front of me, and I might edit it a little bit, but they don't see that other studio part, where you actually take these images back into your studio and maybe create a whole nother painting based on that sketch. With painting the cowboy, especially, I don't always have that luxury of saying, hey, meet me over here at this time, and I'm going to take some pictures against this beautiful backdrop. It just doesn't happen that way. These are working cowboys. I do have one or two that will model for me, or we can go out for an hour and I could take a million photos of them, but it's not always the perfect time of day. So in creating, like, say, this nocturne, that was created from a daylight photo that I had of one of the local ranchers. And he was coming out of a corral because it was last year they had invited me to their branding. And so once in a while I'll go out on horseback and round up the cattle with them. That's the only part that I will do with them. And then they'll go back and start separating the calves from the cows and stuff like that. And I don't get involved in that part. But anyway, he was coming out of the corral. This is when I think they were about done. And he was coming out of the corral and he was walking his horse back over to the trailer. All those shots too are so great because it reminds me of a movie or somebody actually mentioned it reminded her of a Marlboro ad or something like that. And I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, it's good. It's got that feel.
Yeah, it's that staging of the piece, and it gives it more of a dramatic feel. And again, it might seem sort of cinematic or whatever. But that's what I try to do with these cowboy paintings. I mean, I can't just, if I painted it just straight from the photo, he would be coming out of the corral. There was sage. There was other cowboys in the picture that didn't necessarily look all that great, and they weren't in the right spot. And then the mountain in the back was completely flat, had flat light on it, had a bunch of scrub brush on it, and there was no sky. So that's when you take one of those images of the cowboy and you have to compose and create a whole new thing, a whole new painting. So I always knew I loved that, but I just didn't know what setting to do it until a few days ago when it dawned on me. I'm like, that's my next nocturne. And so I had been out maybe a week or two before painting the Inyo Mountains, and I just love the shapes of these mountains in the background. And so I actually looked at one of my sketches that I had on my little shelf of sketches, used that as the background, plopped him right in the center of the painting, and then created the whole nocturne effect after that. So that's the difficult part, is turning it from daylight into nighttime.
day for night. That's what they used to call that in Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
It was a filmmaking technique. Yeah.
It is. And when you look at those old movies, you're like, that is a daytime scene and it looks night, you know? And I wish I was on the set of those movies back then to see, or maybe back in their editing room to see how they create that. Cause I just thought that was just amazing. So that's basically the same thing I'm doing, you know, in my paintings. When the moon's out and it's full, it's really bright out here and you could literally see everything. But it's got this grayness to it. There's no color to it at all, you know, but you could see shadows on the ground. You could see everything really clear. So it's just, I have that in my head as I'm creating this, and I start mixing little piles of paint for the sky in the background. And that's the key of the whole painting is when I do those colors and get them just where I want them, that keys the rest of the whole painting.
Do you start with one section, or do you go to, you know, maybe a portion of the sky, a portion of the mountain foreground, and the central subject? How does that evolve? Well,
every painting is a little bit different. When I'm outdoors, everything keys to the sky. So I paint the sky first. And I've watched other painters where they might paint the sky last. But for me, out here in California with our light and the way things are, that haziness that I like in the work that I've seen like other painters in the past, like Sam Hyde Harris do, you have to key to the sky because especially when I lived in LA, when you have when you're out painting plein air and there's this like yellowish sort of smoggy sky, everything keys to that. The buildings have that hazy yellow tinge to them. So there's no way I can paint the buildings or paint the landscape first and then go back to the sky, because by the time I go back to the sky, the sun has moved and now the sky looks a little bluer. So I don't do that. I actually key to the sky. So I paint the sky first, paint the background mountains, and then from there I might move around the painting and start blocking in other colors and values. But I usually do those two steps first because those are also my value steps. So I don't do it any other way. It's just that's the way it works for me. But when I go to the rest of the painting, I do all the shadow areas first. Then I do the light.
So you're working from dark to light?
Yeah, I work from dark to light, but I start my painting from the background usually with the sky. So like in this, the latest Nocturne painting, I painted the sky and the clouds first. And then I painted that distant mountain. And once I had that, then I started and I painted the entire cowboy and horse and dog. I did that first because you have to put that in. You have to put that into the painting right away. You can't. It's not like you paint the whole landscape and then plop the cowboy in there. It would probably look pasted. So he has to be part of the scene and he has to fit in there. So you kind of work him in there and then work around him and start adding the elements in there.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's a little back and forth.
Yeah, so that way you maintain that atmospheric look that the whole painting has.
Right. Yeah. Now I have in the past taken some of my plein air paintings that to me are pretty good paintings, but if they had a figure in them or something, I think they would be even better. So I have done that where I've taken a plein air painting and then I've added a cowboy to it. I could do that too, but it's not really that big of a cowboy. It might be a cowboy in the distance or something just to add some life to the painting. So that's pretty easy to do. But if you're doing a painting the main subject is the cowboy right in front, you got to put that guy in first.
So outdoor painting really informs a lot of your work.
Oh yeah.
When did you first start painting outdoors?
So this is a funny story. I have an old friend who lives in the Orange County area. And we both loved art, and we both loved going to art shows. And the one thing that we were really drawn to was the ocean. So we used to go and take our easels down to the beach. And I'm talking not even a plein air easel. I'm talking about a regular, like, triangular easel that you could just like stick in your car, prop up. Yeah. And we would put a canvas on there and paint. And we wouldn't necessarily paint what's right in front of us, but we would paint a seascape. It was really, this was really fun because he had a friend that was a professional seascape artist up in Carmel, in one of the galleries up there. I think the guy's name was Dave Dalton. Yeah. And so he was a seascape artist. And so we used to take trips up there and go look at the, galleries and see the paintings and stuff like that. But we had I didn't know the plein air thing at that time. I knew of artists back in the time of Monet going outdoors and painting, but I didn't think of doing it myself. So when we would go to the beach, we'd be going to the beach because we want to be at the beach, but we thought, let's just take our easels and paint, So it wasn't, we're going to go paint the cliffs down Laguna. We're just going to go plop on the sand and just paint. People would come around and see what we're doing. They're like, hey, you're not painting that scene right there in front of you. Like, no, but
you were just there for the ambiance, right?
Exactly. And then one day we were down there. We had only done that a couple of times, but one day we were down there and I saw this guy bring a pochade box and set up, and he was actually painting right, what was right in front of him. And I thought, oh, now that's cool. And that's how I started. And this was like 30 years ago. And it might've been one of the Laguna guys that I know now, but I didn't even ask him his name at the time. So I didn't know who it was.
I wonder what he thought of you guys. What are they doing?
I don't know. But anyway, that was my my entrance into the whole plein air thing, is seeing that guy. And then I started looking it up. Now at the time there was no social media. So this was just like, I had to look it up, the hard way. And then I would go to galleries, and then eventually I met other artists that did plein air, and I met the people who made the plein air pochade box at the time. And one of the only companies that was making boxes at that time was Open Box M in Wyoming. It was mom and pop shop. It was Mike and Coletta Meyer, and they had started making boxes back in, I think, 89. And that was my first box. I don't have the original box, but I have several of those boxes because to me they're like the best. And now, other companies and artists have made boxes. But yeah, so once I had that box, I was just on the road. I was just like, I'm going to do this. This is what I'm going to do.
You got an early start with plein air painting. And you also mentioned earlier about the Walter Foster books that got so many people started in painting.
Yeah, yeah.
And you ended up writing one of the earliest books that I'm personally aware of about plein air painting that was published by Walter Foster. Yeah.
Well, that was, so here's a little bit of the backstory to that. I was in Laguna at the time, and I had a shop there where I did screen printing and stuff. And I was painting on the side. It wasn't a full-time gig necessarily yet. And I was painting like every moment I could until like 5 o'clock in the morning. Just,
whoa.
Not outdoors, but painting in the studio. And then I would go on the weekends or in the afternoon, and I would go paint in Laguna Canyon, things like that. But because of my business background, I knew that in order to make this a career, I had to make money at this. I had to do something. So one of the things too was teaching. I thought, I'm doing this now. I could probably teach and make a little bit of side money that way. I'm not exactly sure how the whole Walter Foster thing came to be, but they ended up approaching me saying, hey, we want to do, plein air book. And so originally I was going to do the oversized book, but we agreed to do this smaller library series book, which was great for me because then students could take it and throw it in their backpack. It was such a small book.
Oh, I like those little books. When I first started learning how to paint, I bought several of them. I didn't know if they were good or not. I just bought them because they were small. I could take them with me when I traveled. Yeah, those were great little books to start with.
Yeah, it was perfect. And the oversized book had a lot of extra stuff in it that I thought I just want it to be simple. And so the smaller library series book was a real clear step by step, chapter to chapter, and there was no extra stuff thrown in there. So I thought that was great. And that was my first book ever and my first writing experience ever, because I had to write it, take the photographs. I mean, I did the whole book. They only put the book together and then sold it. So I had to give them everything for the book. So I had also photograph, which meant I had to learn how to take good photos, or, the best photos I could take. So I had a photographer friend that was next door to me, and he showed me how to take good photographs of the paintings using a gray card every time. And of course, that was way before the digital cameras and things like that. So yeah, it was film. And so once I got the book together, all the information, I had to give it to them in a typed form. So I had a girlfriend of mine type everything up for me. And those experiences are great, because you could talk about those experiences, because now everything's so fast. It's all digital. It's all just like, but there's still problems that we have, taking photos with the digital camera.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this morning when I was doing the little video of my nocturne to share with everyone, it wasn't picking up. It was changing the whole colors palette on the painting through the iPhone. So I have to learn how to try to bypass something or use a filter or something to take better, something that I could put on my phone.
So what kind of iPhone are you on?
I think it's the 10. It's
okay.
Like XS or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a great app out there that allows you complete manual control of exposure, your color profiles, and things like that. And that's called Filmic Pro. It's a paid for app, but man, it's worth it. I use it a good bit. You can have a lot of control over the color.
On video too?
Yeah, it's all video. It's a video app.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And it's a fantastic tool. It takes a little time to learn, but once you do, it gives you a lot of control over the native camera app.
Oh, that's so great. Because, yeah, I was having a little bit of trouble. It wasn't picking up the tint of the whole painting, which is sort of a bluish, greenish tint to give that midnight look. It wasn't picking it up. It wanted to clear it up and warm things up. Okay, but that's how it goes. So with the book, once they got all that information, they printed thousands of books and put them in all of their stores that they distributed them at, which was like
they'd put them in Michael's and Hobby Lobbies and places like that. Yeah. Oh
yeah, I think Michael's and Hobby Lobby were their biggest account, and then all the art stores, like the Laguna Beach art store, she carried them. Other art stores had them, and it was fun because I would be traveling and going on a painting trip, and I would stop. I would have to stop at an art store because I need like thinner or something like that, or a color that I left home, and I would see my book in there, and it was pretty cool. So once I did that book, that was just my ability to increase the number of people that came to my workshop. It was just amazing, because now people had the book and they were like, "Oh, I want to take a workshop." And so that's what that book did for me. It really put me on the map as a teacher. I started doing a lot of workshops, and then they would bring their books to the workshop, and it was really fun. It was a really fun experience. I'm glad I did it. I haven't done anything since, but I mean, I did do a couple of videos. I did one for American Artist Magazine. Every time I did something like that, it really increased my ability to pretty much get more students.
I think it's great that you've got this book. It's a classic. It's like I said, it's one of the earliest. The Walter Foster series, I bought them. I still have several in my collection. Some of the large format ones were pretty interesting. Some of them weren't great, but some of them were very good. I've got one by Robert Moore that was just fantastic.
Yeah, they actually, and I'm not sure if he just did the one or not, but they actually showed me that Robert Moore book when they wanted me to do my book. And they showed me, there was another artist, and I think he was a Canadian artist, who sort of did a plein air book. It was part plein air. And they gave me those as like examples of what I could do in my book. And that was the large format book, though. That wasn't the small library series book. So, it gave me some great ideas. And then after I did my my book, they asked Scott Burdick to do one plein air on watercolor. So that was kind of neat. And so then other artists started asking, how'd you get the book? How did you do the book? And I said, well, just happened. And then other artists started doing, right after that, Kevin McPherson actually had his book out, his plein air book out first. And his big book called Light and Color, I think it was.
Yeah, which was a fantastic book in itself.
That was I love that book. That was a great book. And he's a good friend. He's a funny guy. And I always wanted to do a sort of a hardcover large book like that. But I felt that I wasn't at that stage yet to do something. So, because that's a big book with lots and lots of information. The book that I did for Walter Foster, they asked me, they said, or they mentioned to me that they wanted the book to they wanted people to be able to pick up the book like a 10-year-old or an 80-year-old. They wanted a large range of people to be able to understand this art book. So,
well, there is something to be said about not overwhelming someone when they're first learning something.
Yeah, and I think Walter Foster wanted to be able to sell these books to the masses. I had to keep the book rather simple and short, quick, to the point. So every time I did a demonstration in the book, it was a clear 4 or 5 steps to get the painting done. And, of course, that's with my experience, but they were pretty simple examples. So anybody could really learn to start painting plein air if they had that ability as an artist to draw. And that's something that I think is huge. And I firmly believe that you have to have those bones. You have to have that ability to draw in order to do what we do. You can't just grab some paint and go out there and slosh it around on your canvas, because you're dealing in perspectives and you're dealing in form, and you have to have that ability to draw.
So now you teach workshops. Well, you've been teaching workshops for quite some time. That book actually probably provided a nice foundation for your curricula.
Oh yeah, it did. Early on, it was basically my syllabus, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that's it. Syllabus. I was trying to find the right word for it. Yeah.
Bring your book to class. This is what we're going to do. And so, it really helped that way.
Talking to artists about their experiences plein air painting. I imagine you've got some great stories about painting outdoors. What's one of the most memorable experiences you've had painting outside?
Oh man, that's great. Great question. Well, yeah, I've had lots of great stories, and every artist I've talked to has had even better stories than I have. But I have one really great experience. Now, when I first started painting plein air, when I first started going to, because there were no big plein air shows when I started like there is now. There was none of that stuff. It was just plein air painting with your friends and maybe doing a gallery show or something like that. But there wasn't this plein air competition sort of thing. And then eventually I went to one, like the first one I ever went to was in Tucson, Arizona in 1999. And that's where I met Matt Smith and some of the other artists that were in the show as well. I met my good friend Gabor Zvagrik. So that's when we met. We had some pizza, chit-chatted, and the next thing you know, we're going on trips together. So yeah, it was good times. So in terms of those events, those plein air shows and stuff, that's great for the camaraderie. Just love it. So many of us had the ability and the chance to meet those other artists that we probably never would have met before. I really enjoyed that experience. In terms of story, so I was up in the Canadian Rockies, and of course, when you go outside of your area, where I was in Los Angeles, so there was nothing scary in LA when you go outdoors to paint, like if you're in a certain area or something, and there might be some riffraff or something going on down the street or something like that.
Scary is relative, Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I have stories painting there too, but I won't go into those.
Yeah.
But I was up in the Canadian Rockies, and I was with a group at Bow Lake, and I think Matt Smith and Ralph Oberg had given me some information about, where to go when I was up there. And so I'm like, yeah, I got to go there. That's where Jimmy Simpson had a lodge. And Jimmy Simpson was the old, back in the 20s and 30s. He was a hunting guide. He actually took Carl Rungus, the famous wildlife painter, on his trips up there. And so he had a lodge. Basically, at that time, it was a bunch of teepees right at the edge of the lake. Eventually, he built the lodge. And so that's where I ended up staying at the lodge. Now, when you go up into the Canadian Rockies, the animals that we have, like here in California, we don't have grizzly bears. We only have black bears, which you never really see that much. And you might have mountain lions and things like that, but those guys, they're pretty stealth and you never see them either. So you don't really get bothered by animals that much here in California, mostly bugs and the wind. But when you're up there, you have to keep your eyes and ears open. And so I had this weird feeling before I even went up there about the grizzly bears. And so I did a bunch of research on them, got the bear spray and stuff like that. I saw them on the side of the road when we were driving up there, took lots of great pictures of the wildlife from the road and things like that. But when we were painting, we never really encountered any danger like that. But one day I walk out of the lodge with another one of my friends, and we see this car and group of people down the dirt road that led out from the lodge to the highway. And it was just like they were looking at something. So we kind of walked over that way, and then sure enough, they're taking pictures of a grizzly bear that's pretty close by. And he was just digging for roots and things like in the tundra. And we're like, oh man, that's great. So we got our cameras out and we started taking pictures of the grizzly bear. Well, we were out there a little bit longer than everybody else. They ended up going back to the lodge or driving off in their car. And so me and my friend were sitting out there taking pictures, and all of a sudden the grizzly bear kind of lifted his head and started sniffing the air. And we're like, oh, check that out. So we're taking pictures. And mind you, again, this is before digital cameras. It was, slide film. We were using slide film in our cameras and just taking, zooming in on him and taking some great pictures and stuff. And then all of a sudden he goes back to what he was doing, but then he lifts his head again. And this time, oh my gosh, he just turned towards us, and you see his shoulders push off. And he just pushes off and he does this bluff charge towards us. Now, oh my.
How far away is the bear?
Well, we thought he was, they tell you to stay at least 80 to 100 yards away from the bear. And we thought we were at least that far, but it was close enough for him he didn't appreciate us being there. So basically he pushed off and did a bluff charge. We didn't know it was a bluff charge. We just thought he was starting to chase us. So there was a car that had pulled up on the dirt road behind us, maybe 20 yards behind us. And they were looking, we just bolted to the car. We were so close to the car that we thought, that's the safest place to be. Now, if there was no car, we probably wouldn't have done that, only because they tell you to just stand still and put your hands in the air and look big, But I think it was just instinctual. There's a car, let's go. We just turn off. And my hat, I had a baseball cap with my sunglasses on it. Yeah. It flew up. I was running so fast, it just flew right off my head. And my friend's all, your cap is back there. I'm like, I'm just going to wait for the bear to go off. So the bear had stopped probably, 30 yards into his run, and then he had stopped. So he was just bluffing us. But man, was that scary.
It worked. It worked.
It definitely worked. And I heard of other artists, painting in, Montana at Glacier, encountering bears, things like that. So I think that's, in terms of plein air painting, that's probably the one animal that would frighten me most. That's the one experience you kind of don't want.
Yeah.
You just want to get some good pictures, but you don't want them chasing you down.
Yeah, I'm not in the mood to be bear food, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I kind of learned my lesson. You just keep your distance. If you're going to take photos of them, make sure you're a super safe distance. Use your telephoto lens. And like I said, we thought we were far enough away.
So what kind of advice do they give you, though, when you're out plein air painting? What should you do to help minimize bear contact?
Make noise. Make noise is one of the biggest things. And if you're in a group, you're probably safer as well. Like when I know a lot of painters like to paint by themselves. I enjoy painting by myself, but I like the camaraderie. I like going in a group. So I think you're always going to be safer that way because somebody can look out for you too. I heard an artist was painting down by a creek in Glacier, and some of their friends were on top of this cliff above them, and they saw a bear approaching them, the friend down by the creek, but they didn't see the bear. So their friends were screaming, yelling, bear is coming, bear is coming. So it's always great to have somebody with you, I think.
Yeah.
And you can take all the precautions, take your bear spray and stuff like that.
The other strange encounters you have is with the public. What kind of encounters have you had with the public when it comes to curiosity about what you're doing with plein air painting?
Oh, it's been pretty wonderful, actually. They love seeing painters, I think, especially children. They come around and they're so curious, and they're really honest too. They'll give you the honest opinion about your painting, where an adult might not say too much. They might just say, "Oh, that's nice," and then walk by. But a kid will, sit there and stare and watch you do it. I had this kid. I was teaching a Laguna workshop, and we were on the beach, and this little boy came up and literally watched me do the whole demo. He was the cutest little guy, and his mom was in the background. She says he likes art, and I love it because it's encouraging, And who knows? The kid might be 20 years old now. He was probably about 8 at the time.
But he may have made an impression.
Maybe he's doing art. I have no idea. So I really love that. I was involved with the Laguna Plein Air Painters, and it was their invitational show that they have every year. And I did the 14th annual was the last one I did. And I think they're probably on 21 or 22 now. But that one was great. And, they usually have our quick draw, which is at the beginning of the event. They have us go out, set up on the beach in the park and things like that. And then they blow an air horn, say, okay, start. They don't cordon it off. They let, people, it's public area. So people are walking up to you going, oh, that's beautiful. You're trying to do this 2-hour painting, the competition part of the thing. And people are coming up to you and talking to you, but I'm so used to it. As a plein air painter, that's what you signed up for. You have to be good with the public. And, you might get somebody that'll say something once in a while, but usually that's pretty rare. It's usually a teenager or something, a bunch of friends or something that just want to stir things up. But most of the time, everybody's really cool and very encouraging. And, you might even sell it to somebody walking by. That's happened before. When I first started painting plein air, I was down in Laguna, and I was with that friend from my earlier story about, when we first started painting plein air. I was painting with him because now we both painted plein air, and we were up in Laguna, up at Heisler Park. And this guy came by with his date. It looked like it was a first date, the way he was talking to her and stuff like that. And he actually bought my painting from me. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think he gave it to the girl, So that was pretty cool.
The romance of plein air.
Yeah. And that was so early on too. So you didn't have Square or one of these apps to make a sale. So the guy had to go to the bank. He goes, I'll be back in a half an hour. I'm like, okay.
Oh,
and
wow.
He came back. My friend goes, he's not going to come back. I go, I don't know. And he did. He came back.
I think that's neat. Yeah. That is so cool.
I thought it was totally cool. Yeah.
I remember the first time I ever did plein air painting, I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. Really? I was afraid that the public would approach me. And I don't mind the public. I think we're ambassadors to the art, but I was just beginning. Yeah. And so I did not know what I was doing. I just I didn't know what I was doing. So I just went out there. I was on a beach in Florida, which is a pretty, it's not a great painting. I got it on my wall here as a reminder, but you know what? People did come up, and after the first one, they were very friendly. They were very talkative about it. and it broke the ice. And I said, okay, I don't think I have anything to worry about here. And so I got into the groove. Yeah. And so it was okay, but I had to get past that stage fright. That's really what it was, stage fright, because it felt like a performance in a way.
Yeah. And I think early on, I might've had a little bit of that. And it wasn't the stage fright so much as the anxiety of them seeing the painting in the beginning stages. And they're like, it just doesn't look like much. You always want them to see it when it's about 90% done, but they come up and you're just starting to block it in and it just looks like mishmash. It doesn't really look like much. So, but eventually get over that too. So now you can't do that when you're painting in one of those plein air events. And I really don't do those anymore, but when you're doing one of those plein air events, you have to be on like all the time. You can't, unless you find a spot where you can hide. There was an artist, and I think he's still going. He's in England. His name is Trevor Chamberlain, a great watercolorist and oil painter. And in his book, he had a small book out on oil painting. And he said, when he doesn't want to be bothered by the public, he puts himself against a wall or in a little cubby hole on the street so nobody can go behind him and see what he's doing. So they just end up just walking by.
Oh, I do that in a workshop. I'm the student so on the back wall.
Teacher goes, I'll come back to you later, and then never comes back. Yeah. But I thought that was kind of a cool technique because, there sometimes when you're out painting plein air, say you woke up and you weren't in the greatest mood and you go, I'm going to go outside and paint, I'll feel better. But you still have that kind of mood in your head and you just don't want to talk to people. I think it's a great technique. Or you just go somewhere completely where there's going to be no people. And when you're in LA or down by the beach, it's like next to impossible. Here where I live now, I could do that all day long.
Oh boy, I think there needs to be a book written about just plein air adventures, not how to paint, but just the adventure and the romance and the and the hardships of plein air painting. I think it'd be a fun read.
Oh yeah, I think so.
So one thing you mentioned early in our conversation is your dad had encouraged you perhaps to consider going to work for Disney. And then I noticed in your bio that you actually was hired as a consultant, if I read that correctly, to Disney.
Yeah. So this is another cool story. My dad encouraged me. And at one point when I turned 18 and I was ready for college and things like that, he said, you should, apply, because Disney actually, you could put in applications anywhere you wanted to work really. So, I mean, I didn't have the experience of doing animation. I didn't go to college for it or anything like that, but you can get on the ground floor, especially back then, doing storyboards or something else. You didn't necessarily have to be an animator, or you could be a background painter. They did gouache backgrounds back then. They did, nothing was digital yet. It was all hand painted stuff. So I put in an application. I wrote them, and they wrote me back and encouraged me to submit some work and stuff like that. But then I got cold feet, so I didn't end up doing that. And at that time, I was starting to get out and work a job and things like that. And I had that want to own my own business. And I didn't know if I wanted to work for somebody and things like that. So I ended up, going a completely different direction. But later on, as a plein air painter and once I was pretty far along in my career, this was in 2000 and I want to say 4 or 6, something like that.
So this is after the book. Yeah,
this is after the plein air book. This is after my career was started. I had a show at American Legacy Fine Arts. Peter Adams and his wife Elaine are the president, and they're the main people that restarted the California Art Club. I've been a part of that club for quite a long time, and Elaine had branched out and started her own gallery. And she had about 6 artists in her gallery, including Dan Pinkham, myself, Peter Adams, and a few others. And so while I was in her gallery, I had a show, and it was called Hidden LA. And it was all my atmospheric paintings of LA and cityscapes and things like that. I would go down to places like Chavez Ravine or Dodger Stadium. This is a place where one of those, where a lot of the early California Impressionists, they used to paint all over LA, and the California scene painters, they painted all over LA. So I was kind of doing my own version of that. And so I had a show with her, and unannounced, and I had no idea these people were coming. A whole bunch of Disney people came to my show, mostly animators and supervisors and stuff like that. They came to my show. And then after the show sometime, I got a call saying that they want to meet me. So I had a private meeting with them, and I thought, well, how cool is this? The Disney people want to meet me. And I was excited. I didn't know what to expect, but turns out that they were working on a film, one of the 3D animated films, and they liked my style. They liked what I did and wanted to use me as a consultant on the film so that they can have their backgrounds, instead of them looking so meticulously done like every leaf on the tree, they wanted to do it more of a plein air style, like the backgrounds, more looser.
That atmosphere.
The atmosphere, but also just the brush strokes, the way, like if you painted a tree, how a plein air painter would paint a tree. They wanted it to look more like that. So I went to the studios over there in Burbank, and I actually sat in a dark room with all their video monitors and all this kind of stuff, and gave them some test brush strokes and things like that for them to, I guess, turn into a program so that they could use it digitally to recreate some of the effects for their backgrounds. So I thought, wow, this is pretty cool stuff.
So you were actually making the brush stroke?
Yeah, I gave them some examples of brush strokes and stuff like that, and they were able to program it somehow and use that in their film. And at the time, they were working on this film about a little dog who thinks he's a superhero. It ended up being the movie called Bolt. It wasn't called that at the time. It didn't really have that name for it yet, but that's what they were working on. So I don't know how much of what I gave them they actually, because I did see the movie and I thought that was pretty cool, and all the backgrounds and stuff like that. But I was able to work with them a little bit there, and then they hired me on as a plein air instructor at their Disney Academy. So on location there at the studios, they had an after work program where the artist could go in and paint the figure and draw and take classes from other instructors and stuff like that. So I was a hired instructor.
So that's kind of like a continuing education type thing? Or?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And basically what they told me is that they had new recruits that were coming out of Cal Arts and some of these art schools, and they wanted them to take some of these classes, and then I would give them a little bit of feedback about the students, and that's, I guess they based some of their hiring on that, like if they thought the student had potential or whatever. So it was kind of like the kids that came over from the schools were sort of on a probation, and they based their hiring on that. So I did that for, I think, a couple of years, and then I think the recession hit after that, and so they kind of shut down that program of hiring outside instructors and stuff like that. And I don't know if they restarted the Disney Academy or not. So, but that was cool. It was like full circle. My dad said, "Oh, you should work, get a job at Disney," and then eventually, just by chance, I had the opportunity to do that without being an employee, but. And then I did a one stint over at DreamWorks, teaching a workshop over there. Some other artists in the past have done that as well. I know that, I'm not sure if Matt Smith did, but I think Clyde Asvig might have done a demo for them at the studios too. I know 2 or 3 other artists had done that. So I thought that was pretty cool when I heard that.
It is. It is. You can see how universal the language of art is.
Oh yeah, and I have many friends that still work at the studios that are great painters, but they just don't want to give up that nice fat check, you know. Yeah, it's something to you have to really take a big risk to go out and be a painter. And it's better to start off when you're young and you don't have all those big responsibilities and stuff like that. But once you have a family and stuff, it's hard. It's a little bit harder to just, hey, I'm going to go become a painter and then just drop. You know, you can't do that. You know, you have to be able to provide and stuff like that. And sometimes, you know, early on in my career, you know, you make money, but you're just getting by. You know, it's not enough to support a whole family of like 4 or 5 people. You know, it's like you gotta. And then as time goes on, then you get into more shows, you start making more money, and it's just the game plan, which you got to think about.
Well, one other thing I've noticed that you've done, I don't know if you're still doing it or not, if you don't mind talking about it. You have your own art gallery. Yes.
Actually, a couple of years ago, I started a gallery. I didn't think I would ever own a gallery because it takes a lot of work. You know, you just don't open the doors and expect people to walk in. You have to do a lot of marketing, getting people in there and stuff like that. Now, it does help when you have artists that have good names that draws collectors and stuff like that too. But of course, you have to advertise it to get them there. But sadly, COVID hit, and where I live, it's such a small town, and it's like a tourist town, mostly for hikers and skiers that come up here. It's not like a tourist town like, say, Jackson Hole, where you have a big square and you have all these galleries and knickknack shops and stuff like that. It's not like that at all. Our town is like a drive-through town. There's no square. So if people were going skiing, they would just go and pass by the gallery. But eventually people saw the gallery and would stop in, and we were doing pretty good, actually. I was really surprised. People would call in, hey, are you going to be at the gallery next week or this or that? And of course, I was there quite a bit at the time. My girlfriend was there. And then I had another friend who helped once in a while. But when COVID hit, there was nobody here. It was like a ghost town. And so I kept it going for a little bit. And then I thought, this is not going to be sustainable. And you can't really run a physical gallery just selling online. That's not what it's meant for. It's meant for people to come in and buy paintings there. You know, you want that walk-in customer. And you meet new people that way. You meet people that are coming into town from different places that may not even care to look at art. Really, they didn't have a plan on going into a gallery, but they're here. They're walking down the street. They see it. They walk in. All of a sudden, they buy a painting, and that happened. That was great. I had a experience where a lady had pulled up with 2 friends right in front of the gallery. Her 2 friends bolted down the street to the used ski shop where they sell used ski equipment and stuff like that, and they also buy it back, called the Gear Exchange. And you would get a lot of people that do that because they're going up to Mammoth to go skiing and stuff like that, or they're going to buy hiking equipment or something like that. So her 2 friends just came out of the car and walked down the street right away, and I could tell that that's where they were going. The passenger, the lady, walked out of the car, looks in the gallery window, and then walks in. And she starts looking around. She goes, "Oh, you know, I never knew there was a gallery here." I go, "Yeah, we're fairly new." And she started walking around, and then she gravitated towards this Matt Smith painting that I had because I had some of Matt's work. And she goes, "This is really pretty. I love paintings and stuff like that." And now, granted, she wasn't probably there to originally go to a gallery. She was going with her friends to go skiing or hiking.
It was just a serendipitous trip.
Exactly. She walks in. So she looked at it, she saw the price, and then she says, do you ship paintings and stuff? I said, yeah, we could do that. No problem. And I thought when she asked that maybe she might just be thinking about it and then she's going to call later. You know, that happens. So she walked out. She left I had a guest book. So she signed a guest book. She walked out and then walked towards where her friends went down the street. And I thought, and my friend was in the gallery with me. He was visiting, and he said, "Oh man, you were so close." and I was like, well, it happens, you know. You don't want to really push too much. You want to encourage people to, you know, to buy art, but you don't want to push it. So she left, and then she came back. And when they came back to the car, her two friends got in the car, and she looked through the window again and then pushed the door open. And I thought, this is a good sign. She goes, you know what? If I don't get it now, I'm not going to get it later. And she bought it. And I thought, oh man, that's awesome. So it was a 10 by 12 of the Eastern Sierras that Matt had painted. And so she bought that. So that was, and those are the kind of customers you're not going to get online. You know, these are just, it's a whole other set of people that have to see things physically, you know, or they might, you know, have to visit a place, and not, you know, she might not be looking online for artwork, you know. So it was just, like you said, serendipitous. She just by chance, she saw my gallery and walked in. So
did you shut it down, or do you still have the space?
No, I actually shut it down because there were too many months where nothing was happening. Yeah. So I decided to shut it down. I'll probably revisit it in the future, but for right now, I'm just going to leave things as they are.
But that was a nice experience that you had. I don't know too many artists that have done this. I met Gregory Packard in Montrose, Colorado. He had a little place, but he only opens it up every once in a while. You know, it's an investment property that he bought, but it makes it's a good showcase for his artwork. It's a beautiful little place. David Boyd, I've been to his gallery in Newnan. That's a family owned place, so which is advantageous when you have a building that's already paid for. So, but he has a beautiful gallery there. The allure of having a gallery, it sounds attractive, but I know it's not an easy business model for people to do right now.
No, and the only reason why I opened it up as well is because I kind of have a name for myself, and I already sell. So, you know, I sold my work, but then I have a lot of friends that wanted to give it a go, and so I had their work as well. And I did a couple of shows. I did a Western show, and I had some great painters in that, including Mark Maggiore and Grant Redden. I had some of their work and a few others. And so with that ability to ask these other artists, I figured I had a good shot of really making a go and keeping the gallery for, you know, keeping it going. But this pandemic was something that nobody would ever imagine. So I just, you know, if I was a gallery that was in business and I had been in business for like 20 years, I probably wouldn't have closed it down. I probably just would have shut it down and just kept doing what I was doing, but not for someone new.
I totally get that. But I thought it was fascinating that you gave it a go. So that's a great experience.
Oh, yeah.
So Frank, one of the things that I've enjoyed about following you and your artwork is there seems to be an exuberance to what you do. You seem to really enjoy painting. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. Where does that exuberance come from?
Well, I'm definitely an extrovert, so that probably helps. I love people. I love the camaraderie of this work that we do, getting together with the other painters and stuff like that. I mean, I'm always encouraging painters to come over here and paint with me, come and visit. And now that things are starting to open up, you know, they probably will. You know, I knew that when I got I love art. I just absolutely love it. I love all kinds of art. I love sculpture. I love different types of art. I love sign painting, believe it or not. I love what they call typography. I was in that in school and stuff like that. And I love that stuff, sign painting and all that kind of stuff, which I dabbled in a little bit when I was young to make some extra money. But I love it so much that I knew that if I made it a career, it had to be fun, you know, because now you're going to try to make money at it full time, and business is tough. running a business can be tough. But I wanted it to be fun. I didn't want to get into it and it's like this daunting, like, oh my gosh. Probably one of the hardest things that artists, I think, have to deal with is their relationships with galleries and things like that. That's probably the toughest thing. You want to keep great relationships and stuff like that. And then, you want them to sell their work. And that's probably the hardest part is making sure you're doing well and the galleries are selling your work and stuff like that. So I think that's probably the one thing that galleries or artists find can be difficult at times, but the right gallery, it's always a fit, it's that fit. One of my best galleries that I was in Montecito in the Santa Barbara area. And man, was she one of the best gallery owners ever.
What made her good?
She knew her clients. She had great relationships with her clients. She also was a go-getter. She didn't just sit there. She called people. She picked up the phone and called clients. She got commissioned work for me. She got magazine articles for me. She did her part in promoting me because I was one of her only living artists. It was a gallery that actually sold early California Impressionist painters like William Wendt and Edgar Payne. She sold the deceased artists as well. But I was like one of her only living artists. So that was a good break too, because she didn't have to deal with, 20 different artists. She was only dealing with a couple. But yeah, this whole business had to be fun for me. Dennis Doheny, a great landscape painter from the Santa Barbara area, he was in a gallery in Beverly Hills called Cargus Fine Art, and they're a great gallery, but they only deal in early California Impressionism and maybe some European impressionistic art. He was a friend of the gallery director since like school days. So they took his work in and man, he did really well with them because he was the only contemporary artist. That was just one of those things where, that's kind of a lucky break because you're just not, you don't have to compete with the rest of your contemporaries. You're just, you're the only living artist in the gallery. And he did beautiful, beautiful work. So, it's not just getting into that type of gallery. You gotta be a good artist. Your painting is hanging next to Edgar Payne or something, so
is that intimidating?
It could be for some. I thought it was just really cool. My persona is just, I just like, I'm a kid in a candy store, I just think it's cool. I'm like, oh yeah, that's great. I love it. To touch on the deceased artists living here in the Owens Valley, these artists painted here, Edgar Payne painted up in Big Pine. And that's like the trailhead is 10 minutes from my house here. And the lakes that he painted at, he used to come here with his family back I think his first experience up here was 1916. I had the chance to talk with his daughter, Evelyn.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, she was 88 years old. And one of the galleries in Laguna Beach did a book on Edgar Payne's drawings. And she was there to sign books and stuff like that. So Glenn Dean and myself went in there and chatted with her for like an hour. And she gave us the scoop on what Edgar Payne did up here. And it was really fabulous. So her first experience too was 1916. She was 4 years old. And what they would do is it would be a 2.5 day trip from Laguna Beach up here to where I'm at. And now it's just a 4.5 hour drive. But there was no roads back then. It was like they had to drive through the sagebrush to get up here. And there was probably wagon trails and things like that. Once they got up here, they stayed for about 2 weeks because it was such a long journey. They would just stay for a while. And he would go up, her and her mom would stay in the camp and keep the camp going or wherever they were at. And then Edgar Payne would just go up into the mountain and just paint all day. That was what they did.
Did you see that movie that was done many, many years ago called Scenic Journey?
Yes. And in fact, that was in the 1940s.
Right.
And it's a pretty cool movie. His brother shot it, I think. It's funny because they don't mention Edgar Payne in the
No,
movie.
they don't. No.
If you recall, they call him the artist.
Yeah.
It's one of those 1940s thing where he has that voice and he's like, the artist is painting while the Packers are going up the mountain. It's really cool. It's really cool. But I've been to some of those locations where in the video where he's standing, and I think it's just awesome. It's a really cool thing to know where he stood and things like that. So I just dig it. I love living here because I have that connection with these artists. And Maynard Dixon also painted here from about 1916 to at different times to 1925. But he mostly was in the Lone Pine area, which is south of me by about 40 minutes. And he loved painting the Inyo Mountains, which is what I'm really loving now myself. Just painting the Inyo Mountains. They have such a different look than the Sierras. And they get covered with snow too, but they're a smaller range, and they have just beautiful shapes and color because they're more purpley in color at certain times of the day, and the shadows are deep blues, and just amazing at sunset too. Just amazing. So I love that connection, and I love trying to figure out where they painted, where he painted his paintings from, down in Lone Pine. So it's just a great thing what we're doing. I just love it.
That would be a fun art field trip to go with someone like yourself who knows where these locations are and knows the stories behind it. I think I would have fun with that.
Yeah, and it's I haven't found every location because some locations have changed. In fact, the town of Lone Pine completely changed because they had a devastating earthquake a long time ago, which leveled a lot of buildings and stuff like that. And they used to have cottonwood trees that lined the highway. The highway was dirt at that time. It wasn't paved. So Maynard Dixon had painted the scene of the post office, and it's a painting that you can see on the internet. And I tried to find that location, and I don't know I can't figure it out because there's no trees anymore. The buildings are different. So, that's just a historical image now, but, some of the Inyo Mountain paintings, I know where he was. So that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Some of it can be kind of hard to track down. I know Ralph Oberg was showing me around Ridgeway, Colorado, which is John Wayne, True Grit country, where the movie was filmed. But you almost have to have somebody show it to you to point it out and say, okay, this is where this scene was filmed, and this is where this scene was filmed, because it's really kind of hard to pull it out. But once you see it, you can say, oh, yeah, I get it. Exactly. That's what it is. But of course, over several decades, things change.
Now, there is one area down in Lone Pine, and Lone Pine is the Western film capital, pretty much, back from the talkies to when they started doing movies in color. They filmed a lot of Westerns there in Lone Pine, and they have a film history museum there. And I've been lucky enough they have a film festival every year in October, and I've done the artwork for their film festival, doing some cowboy artwork for their promotions. But going into that museum, they have a whole tour that you could take of the Alabama Hills, which is right there at the base of Mount Whitney. And it's an amazing boulder field area. There's like boulders everywhere and dirt roads going here and there. And so they filmed a lot of Westerns. They filmed the Gunga Din there. They filmed John Wayne movies there. So many movies, and more contemporary movies like Iron Man with Robert Downey Jr. They filmed that there. So they actually have those locations. They have the old movie stills of locations there, and then you can actually find those spots and take a picture, of what it looks like now. Because that place has not changed. It's natural. It's all natural. There's no building there or anything like that.
Well, where can people find out more about you, Frank?
They can actually go on my website, serranofineart.com. I'm not as good as I should be with the posting on there, but I do change it when I have new work. But the best place is probably Instagram. I'm on Instagram every day, whether I'm posting or answering comments and things like that. So people can usually find me there. I post my most recent work there, and I also might mention workshops and things like that on there. But you can also, like I said, go to my website and go to the contact page, leave me your information, and I can call or email anybody back.
Fantastic. I'll provide links in the show notes. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Frank.
Oh, such a pleasure. This was really fun. You talk about things that you haven't talked about in a while, and it kind of brings back some great memories.
Yeah.
Like the grizzly bear.
That was good. Very grateful to Frank Serrano for taking the time to talk with us today on The Artful Painter. Be sure to check out his website, his Instagram account, and also his book, Plein Air Painting in Oil, which is published by Walter Foster. Even though it was written back in 2002, I believe it was, it's still very relevant for outdoor painters today. I have links in the show notes. I want to thank my associate producers. These are the people who provide financial support to The Artful Painter with their generous donations. I have 3 that I want to acknowledge today. All 3 are returning contributors to The Artful Painter. So this is Priya Gore, Aliona Price, and Richard Husband. All of them have repeatedly supported The Artful Painter, and to each and every one of you, I am so very grateful. To see a list of all contributors to The Artful Painter, please visit theartfulpainter.com and click on the Donate tab. Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of The Artful Painter. May your tubes be full of beautiful and light, fast colors, and your brush strokes confident. I'll see you all in the next edition of The Artful Painter.
And we're getting a picture on the TV.